Daljit Dhaliwal.
In a country of 45 million, 1 in 10 Colombians has been forcibly displaced in the last 20 years. Some 375,000 are also living as refugees in neighboring Ecuador and Venezuela. Andrea Lari of Refugees International has recently returned from visiting the refugees of what has become the worst humanitarian crisis in the Western Hemisphere. Andrea, welcome to Foreign Exchange, and thank you for being with us to talk about this problem.
Thank you very much, Daljit. It's great to be with you here.
Let's start by looking at the situation in Colombia. Why don't you describe for us how the ongoing armed conflict is fueling this regional refugee crisis?
See, what we have seen in the last few years of visiting the country is that there are several dynamics of violence happening in Colombia. So you have illegal armed groups, either the guerrilla, leftist guerrilla, or the new organized paramilitary groups that are battling each other to control strategic territory for the coca business, either cultivation, processing, and then marketing the product of the coca out of the country. There is also a very intense counterinsurgency and counter-narcotics strategy that the government of Colombia has been implementing in the last few years, and the army is pushing the illegal armed groups to more remote areas. What happens is that this violence is creating a huge amount of civilians to leave their houses, to flee in order to find security elsewhere.
So all of these parties to the conflict, the rightist paramilitaries, the leftist rebels, and the government forces are responsible for creating this refugee crisis? Yes,
correct. There are different sides of responsibility. In this case, we would say that the majority, or recently the majority of the displaced people are fleeing guerrilla operations and are fleeing crossfire between the guerrilla and paramilitaries. But also the National Army is responsible for causing displacement.
So there are 3 million people who are displaced inside Colombia and close to 400,000 who have been forcibly displaced and who have become refugees in Venezuela and in Ecuador. What are the conditions like for those who are living in the border areas, and what is the situation like for the refugees who have been internally displaced?
Okay, well, in terms of living condition of the refugees, and what we saw in May and June in northern Ecuador and in southwestern Venezuela, is that the characteristics of the conflict in Colombia has moved beyond the borders of the countries. So there are dynamics of the conflict that are now rooting into northern Ecuador. This means illegal armed groups crossing over into Ecuador, exercising their social control and committing a series of crimes that are very typical of the Colombian situation. Let's say extortion, kidnappings, targeted assassination. The way of this group to operate is to assert control of the communities and making sure that they have control on strategic territories. Additionally, we have seen a militarization from the host governments to those areas, both Ecuador and Venezuela. So they're sending their armies there to try to resist the influx of these illegal groups and their criminal activities. We also saw a very disturbing phenomenon we were not aware before going there. It is that Ecuadorian and Venezuelan nationals, because of being targeted by these groups and because of the increasing violence in those areas, they are fleeing their own homes towards central parts of the country or westwards. And finally, well, I can tell you about the numbers of refugees, and the number is increasing. We have seen, for instance, in Ecuador, numbers of newly Colombian refugees in doubling from 2007 to 2008, and the first 5 months of 2009, the numbers of refugees already matched the one of the year before. So there is what we would characterize a spillover effect of the conflict that is taking root in those bordering areas, making them less stable, more dangerous, and then expanding the humanitarian needs of both the refugees and the host communities.
So these border areas are beginning to mirror Colombia?
Correct. I think this is the perfect expression to show how the dynamics of the Colombia are now present, evident, visible in northern Ecuador and southwestern Venezuela.
And what are the governments of Colombia, Ecuador and Venezuela doing to tackle these problems on a regional basis? I mean, do they cooperate? Are there enough resources? And what concerns you most about the plight of the refugees in terms of their social and economic conditions?
Well, in terms of assisting the refugees, so those Colombians that have crossed into the neighboring countries, the government of Ecuador and the government of Venezuela have several policies to assist them, and they are doing this together with the High Commissioner of Refugees, that is the United Nations in charge of providing protection to refugees. But what we have seen in Ecuador, we have seen a very progressive refugee policy. We are very surprised to see a new initiative that is a pilot exercise for the region and the world, I would say, is the enhanced registration process that is actually aiming at registering and document at least 50,000 Colombians within this year and up to the 130,000 that there are deemed to be in need of protection in Ecuador.
And that's important because it gives them rights and protects them from abuses of all sorts, does it?
This is fundamental. First, because without that document, Colombian refugees cannot legally work in Ecuador. So that document, this visa that they get, this card, says clearly that the holder has a right to work in Ecuador, and then this will be avoided for them to be discriminated against. And second, a very important aspect is that they can travel with that document without fearing to be harassed and attacked by security forces. We spent 2 days in one of these registration centers. This is a mobile unit, and we interviewed dozens of these refugees. They came out of this process. It's a one-day-long process. They were all so happy. They were telling us stories of having been wait for years to come out of the limbo and the shadow. Now some of them told us, finally, I can walk with my head up on the streets of Ecuador without fearing of being either arrested or kicked out of the country.
Did you have an opportunity to talk to them about how the international community is dealing with the refugee crisis in that part of the world? I mean, when you think of other countries who are dealing with their refugee crisis, say, for instance, Sudan or Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, even the Palestinians. I mean, those are refugee situations that do make the news headlines, yet Colombia seems to be under the radar. Why do you think that is?
This is so astonishing to me, because as you said earlier in the interview, I mean, 1 out of 10 Colombians have been displaced forcibly in the last 20 years.
It's the second highest figure after Sudan.
Correct.
Right?
So just picture it out and put the population of New York State, Massachusetts, and Maryland together. Imagine that whole population is about 30 million people, because this is when we compare to the U.S. population. 30 million people being displaced from their homes, their villages, their cities, and trying to seek protection and assistance in another part of the country. But this is an amazing. And unfortunately, my understanding is that the information that comes from Colombia and the Colombian conflict is basically hinged on 2 points, is counter-terrorism and counter-narcotics. So it resonates on this side of the hemisphere on 2 major issues. And then the third issue that's been recently discussed is the signing of the free trade agreement between Colombia and the United States. I mean,
so our relationship, or the international community's relationship, is seen through this very narrow prism, if you like, and refugees and displaced people and human rights are very much at the bottom of the rung of the ladder.
Unfortunately, they are not surging to the highest priority in policy making, the refugee issue and the humanitarian issue that is affecting refugees and displaced alike. But again, there are also positive signs, and this is what I'd like to stress again, this initiative of the Ecuadorian government that is a pilot, is an example on how a government recognize the needs of treating refugees in need of protection as its own citizens. And this is, for us, is a very positive step in the right direction.
Okay, Andrea Lari, thank you very much for coming on the program and of course, shedding some light on this very underreported story.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.